Welcome to Seekers and Finders, the podcast where we explore the infinite pathways to truth, creativity, and connection.
I think a lot of people come to Asian spirituality kind of with the mindset that I'm going to find the one tradition that's going to, carry me all the way through to enlightenment, and I'm going to stay in this one tradition and only practice what this tradition is teaching, and people believe the teachings and they get into, this community without really checking to see if that community and those kinds of practices actually fit with their own natural orientations, inclinations, and abilities. And so you can wind up, I made a joke in a recent episode of my own podcast that it's kind of like you marry the first person that you see, and I'm advocating maybe date around a little bit first, right? Like maybe you're the kind of person who is very naturally oriented towards an open heart, but you put yourself into a community where that's not the focus for whatever reason. They may not even sort of value those kinds of practices. They may not teach those kinds of practices, and you beat your head against the wall for years trying to practice some kind of meditation, when then one should shop around, one should date around before committing to the one tradition. And then I've also learned myself through my explorations and this more kind of open-minded, more practical kind of approach, I've learned that every one of these traditions has its own viewpoint about what the superior practice is. Every tradition thinks their practice is the right one, and every tradition says this is the one and only way to achieve enlightenment, and this is the one and only teaching, and everybody has their dogma like that, and all the practitioners fall into it. But actually what I'm saying in the book is, I'm advocating a doctrinal agnosticism, right? Or a kind of, openness to not falling into the dogmas of any one tradition, but to seeing what works for you, measure the results of the practice in your own life, in your own well-being, in your own happiness, and how you're getting along with your family and in the world and so forth. And then, judge accordingly which practices are best for you, not on the basis of what somebody is telling you or what a tradition or a book is telling you, but on the basis of what actually works for you.
Hi, and welcome to the Seekers and Finders podcast with Gary Falk and
Stephen Bright.
Stephen Bright. Today's guest is a good friend of mine, C. Pierce Salguero. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of things, whatever Pierce wants to talk about. But one of the things we're definitely going to talk about, because I just read the book, well, most of it, and I got a lot of stuff to talk about in this book. But first, Pierce, I can read the little blurb on the back, or you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what we want to do here for the next 90 minutes, let's say, with this podcast. A lamp unto yourself.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Yeah. So a little bit about myself is probably, for this particular setting, the thing that might be most relevant is I'm a lifelong explorer of Asian spiritual practices primarily, but a lot of other practices from around the world, a lot of different traditions. Got involved with that sort of thing very, very young, and made it my career. I decided that I actually initially was thinking I would be a Buddhist monk, and I spent some time in a Buddhist monastery. But during that time, actually, it became clear to me that that wasn't the path for me. I was somebody that belonged in the world, and engaged with family and ordinary life, but I still was sort of scratching my head trying to figure out how I could spend my life studying and talking about and thinking about the spiritual traditions that I was interested in. And I've always been a studious type. I've always been really interested in, reading and studying and interested in languages and culture. And so I also wanted to be able to travel the world and be able to spend time in different places and different spiritual communities. And so I landed on the obvious conclusion that the only job for me, if I wasn't going to be a monk, the only job for me that possibly made any sense was to become a professor of Asian religions. And so that's what I did. I came back to graduate school. I'd been out of school for 7 years or so. At that point, I came back to graduate school, put myself through a master's and PhD programs, primarily focusing on Buddhism, intersections between Buddhism and health, particularly. And then yeah, since I got my degree, I've been teaching at Penn State University, has a small liberal arts college outside of Philadelphia, and I've been teaching there and spending a lot of time doing academic scholarship, academic books, academic articles, based, in research on the field of my expertise. And recently, I have once again begun to write books for a wider audience. I had done that previously before becoming an academic. I wrote a couple books on traditional Thai medicine for practitioners of Thai medicine, but this is the first time in the last 2 years, I've kind of pivoted to publishing books that are widely accessible for pretty much for everybody. So a year ago, I wrote sorry, 3 years ago, I wrote a book introducing Buddhism called Buddhish. It's about how I spent my whole life studying Buddhism, but yet I'm not Buddhist. So that book came out in 2022. And then this is kind of a follow-up, sort of widening the lens to look at Asian spiritual traditions more generally. And I give a little bit of my own story of my own engagement with those traditions, and then some practice instructions, a little bit of history. I kind of wear the scholarly hat in a couple chapters where I give some history and some kind of what I call critical thinking about Asian spirituality. And then, it's really kind of, it's not a scholarly book though. It has those two chapters that have a little bit more of kind of a, like a scholarly perspective, but they're written for a wide audience. And most of the book, I'm really speaking kind of about my own personal experience and giving some advice as somebody who's just been investigating this topic for going on 40 years now. So I'm not quite as old as you guys, but I think I have something to share in this regard, and I started to put it down into writing. So yeah, maybe I'll leave it there. See where you want to go with this.
Well, one of the reasons why I really love this book, and as I say, I read most of it. There was one section I kind of had to avoid, which was interesting because I have a resistance to certain things. But one thing I love about the book is that it's you cover three angles. You cover the academic angle, but you're not merely an academic. You're a practitioner. You go deeply into that, and that's I'm always interested in people's practice and what they're getting out of it. But the academic stuff is very good. And then also, as you mentioned, you have that last section on critical thinking. Now, Stefan and I could have used some critical thinking when we joined our cult back in the 1970s. The critical thinking was a big no-no.
Right.
If you think, you're out. So anyway, I like the book. There's a lot of stuff in the book that I want to cover with you today, but I want to also just like a little shout out. If you're a beginner, a newbie to the whole spiritual thing, this is, and you feel drawn in any way, or you feel a connection with the Asian traditions. Boy, this is the book. But in reading, I said this is not only for beginners. You can be a seasoned practitioner and still get a lot from the book because you go into such depth and you give such great illustrations. So it's a great book. Here's what I liked most about it. You present Asia, and you cover all the major Asian traditions. Like as it says here, a beginner's guide to Asian spiritual practice for Advaita. We have Advaita, we have Buddhism, we have yoga, we have Zen. You cover a little bit of the Kashmir Shiva tantric stuff. You covered it all. But what I liked about the book was this: you divide it up into three sections or streams or threads, right? The path of the mind, which we could maybe call Advaita or Zen, right? Then the path of the heart, the bhakti path, the devotional path, and that would be, that would be a lot of the Hindu stuff. But also, there's some Buddhist devotion, as you point out, with the Amitabha Buddha. That's a devotional path. But also, the third one, and this is the one I resisted looking into, the path of the body. So we have mind, we have heart, and we have body. The Kundalini, the channels and what are they? The channels and the nidras. I don't know. So there's a whole three thing. So, and in your section called "Putting It All Together," you emphasize the idea of what you want to do, and this is in general as a practitioner, is integrate everything. So you're not just off in the mind or off in the heart or off in the body. You want to combine the whole thing. So,
Yeah.
so let's use that as a kicking off point. Do you have anything you want to say about the?
Yeah. Let me just respond to a couple of things that came to mind as you were talking. So the first one is just about the intended audience, and so it is intended to be a beginner's guide. I do start the book with like, hey, do you not know anything whatsoever about Asian spirituality and you want to get started? Here's kind of like a roadmap for doing that. I do think of it sort of as like, I've been in this field for many decades. Let me tell you what I wish I knew from the beginning. It's sort of that's kind of the framework for how I'm approaching that, and really talking people through kind of the basics, the real basic vocabularies, the basic kind of orientations, and then getting into sort of a different approach than what you normally would find. So normally you would find in an introduction to Asian, religions in a textbook or something like that, or even online, you would find, a chapter on Buddhism, a chapter on Hinduism, a chapter on Taoism, a chapter on, whatever. So this book is cutting across those categories in a different way, like what you said. And so I wouldn't put a particular tradition into any one of these streams. I would actually say these three streams are kind of available within Buddhism, within Hinduism, within Taoism as distinct kind of like orientations or skill sets or perspectives or sets of practices. And certain traditions do tend to emphasize one of these threads more than the other. So, Zen is very meditation focused and less so, working with, say, devotional prayer or with, bodily kind of yogic style exercises, although some of that is there in Zen. If you want the real sort of, devotional practices, you might find a different stream of Buddhism to practice in, like the Pure Land tradition or something like that. Tibetan Buddhism has the yoga practices, but on the whole, all of these threads can be found within Buddhism and within various forms of Hinduism. And I'm advocating, you're right, I'm advocating an integration in the approach. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think a lot of people come to Asian spirituality kind of with the mindset that I'm going to find the one tradition that's going to, carry me all the way through to enlightenment, and I'm going to stay in this one tradition and only practice what this tradition is teaching, and people sort of believe the teachings and they get into, this community without really checking to see if that community and those kinds of practices actually fit with their own natural orientations, inclinations, and abilities. And so you can wind up I made a joke in a recent episode of my own podcast that it's kind of like you marry the first person that you see, and I'm advocating maybe date around a little bit first, right? Like maybe you're the kind of person who is very naturally oriented towards an open heart, but you put yourself into a community where that's not the focus for whatever reason. They may not even sort of value those kinds of practices. They may not teach those kinds of practices, and you beat your head against the wall for years trying to practice some kind of meditation. When then you know th- I actually tell the story. This is me. I beat my head against the wall for 5 years trying to get somewhere with Theravada Buddhist meditation retreats, very very intensive, hours a day, silent retreats, monastic lifestyle, all of that, trying to achieve certain kinds of levels of concentration. And my brain just wasn't built that way, and it was very, very difficult. And then I discovered a different path. I discovered the path of the heart, and within like a month, I had achieved or experienced some really, deep kind of heart opening experiences. And I just was a natural fit for that kind of practice. And so I'm saying, that one should shop around, one should date around before committing to the one tradition, and then I've also learned myself through my explorations and this more kind of open-minded, more practical kind of approach. I've learned that every one of these traditions has its own viewpoint about what the superior practice is. Every tradition thinks their practice is the right one, and every tradition says this is the one and only way to achieve enlightenment, and this is the one and only teaching, and everybody has their dogma like that, and all the practitioners fall into it. But actually, what I'm saying in the book is, I'm advocating a doctrinal agnosticism, right, or a kind of openness to not falling into the dogmas of any one tradition, but to seeing what works for you, measure the results of the practice in your own life, in your own well-being, in your own happiness, and how you're getting along with your family and in the world and so forth, and then judge accordingly which practices are best for you, not on the basis of what somebody is telling you or what a tradition or a book is telling you, but on the basis of what actually works for you. So I think that's maybe the big picture approach here. And that kind of approach, I think, has been denigrated as, dilettantism, as, cafeteria spirituality, as, whatever. Everybody has sort of opinions about this kind of spirituality. And I guess what I'm saying is, I think this kind of spirituality is a legitimate approach to spirituality. I'm not saying it's right for everybody, and if somebody feels very committed, they want to be a Tibetan Buddhist, go for it. I have no qualms, no criticism of you if that works for you. But I want to make an argument that there is a legitimate that this is a legitimate approach to spirituality, to come at it in a more pragmatic way, and sort of shop around and look and see what works for you.
That's really interesting because when we were with the guru in the early 70s, I was there for 6 years. Gary was there a little longer. It was a devotional path. It was a bhakti path. He came out of the Aurobindo ashram, which strangely enough was a path of the illumined mind. But for some reason, when the guru came over here, it was a more devotional path. But the one thing that I noticed, first of all, I didn't pick it because I was drawn to it. I was taken there by a musician who I was working with at the time that was part of the group. So I really didn't have any kind of feel for it. And what you just said makes so much sense. When I was there, I never really found a comfort zone there. The devotional entity was the guru, and a lot of those gurus at the time, Osho, Bhaktivedanta, they were all the devotional icon of their particular path rather than rising above that, even though they said, my disciples, they will all achieve enlightenment, but the enlightenment was through this icon. And when I left, I was confused because even though I've been meditating since that early time, and my meditations have always been very sweet. That's the only thing that really held on with me. But it wasn't until just recently that I had a tremendous Kundalini experience. My heart chakra just opened up. And I discovered that, yes, in fact, that devotional path, that path of unconditional love, was the path that I was right for. So I actually fell into it unconsciously, and it was the right path, but I didn't understand it at such a young age. I wasn't even drawn to it that much. I just became part of the group, the tribe. I went along with the rest of the tribe,
Mm.
and then because I continued on with my spiritual path, it kind of clicked in my late 50s, early 60s. But what you say, that people should be following a path that they are the most attracted to without falling into this, this problem of just deciding to become a Zen Buddhist. I mean, how do you get there? And is it the
Mm.
book that you wrote that kind of gives um, uh, a roadmap for people to figure out maybe this one's better for me? I should, you know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 So first, I just want to say it's not necessarily go with the path that you feel most attracted to, because you can certainly, I think, kind of fool yourself into, you know, all kinds of wants, right? That we can think we really want, or we can think, we can talk ourselves into wanting things, or we can be basing the decisions on, unskillful kind of emotional and patterns, or thought patterns. So it's not necessarily go with the one that is most attractive. I would say maybe go with the one that you're most aligned with. And then there's a question of how do you discern your alignment towards a certain path. And so I do talk in the book a little bit about, trying to find your own internal guidance, your own internal discernment about, what kinds of groups and communities you want to be involved in, how they make you feel. So I talk about that in one section, and then in the critical thinking chapter that that Gary was maybe, thinking was a stretch for, or didn't really fit maybe, in the contemporary spirituality community. I do think a lot of people sort of denigrate thought, and there's sort of an idea that the idea comes from certain kinds of meditation practices where the whole point is to quiet your mind. And so therefore people are like, oh, then thoughts are terrible and we should get rid of them, and thinking is bad, which I think is very short-sighted.
Yeah.
And as I say in this chapter on critical thinking, I think critical thinking is your kind of your safety net, and also a really important toolkit for navigating spirituality. And certainly subjecting the community you're in to some kind of critical analysis. What's happening here, the power dynamics with the guru at the center, and taking a good cold hard look at what this social dynamic is with this group and so forth, and do I want to participate in that? I think is really, really important. So I talk about a couple cult dynamics and things like that in a couple places in the book. But I would say, like, just, I don't know the details of your particular story, but it sounded to me like it could have been that you got the thread right, going with the heart, going with that kind of devotional practice, that you were naturally somehow attracted to that, and maybe that was a good fit for you, but maybe the practice itself wasn't right. And so I think you mentioned, it was real devotional, but then you started doing meditation later, and then that sort of led to a heart opening. So it may have just been, right ballpark, wrong. No, wait, I'm going to mix my metaphors. Right neighborhood, wrong house, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, but what's interesting is unlike Bhaktivedanta, who had the Hare Krishna movement, and in that bhakti devotional, they chanted to Krishna and all of that, and the devotion that Ramakrishna had for Mother Kali. Ours was directed to the Supreme through the Guru. And all of the actions that we did, the meditations, I mean, we had a regimen. So he asked us to get up at around 5:45 every morning, shower and meditate for a half hour, 45 minutes or so. Those of us who went to work in the city or who had jobs around come back in the afternoon before dinner, shower, and meditate for another 45 minutes. And then there was um, twice a week meditations with him. Some of us were a little more into the inner circle, either through marriage or just because he wanted certain people in who were able to spend time with him at his house. So that was all part of it. But I was in my mid 20s and I thought I knew what I wanted. And what was interesting is that I think I accidentally fell into the path because it was the right thing for me to do without me consciously even knowing about it. However, I wasn't able to take full advantage of it because I wasn't totally there. I worked in the city at the time, so a lot of the disciples were in Queens for the entire day. I was not. So I had two lives going on. But um, the whole meditation thing was the one thing that I left with. Now, when you said about, excuse me, when you said about the concept of silencing the mind, what I found was that the technique to do that, even though the thoughts are still moving through your mind, actually takes you to the next step. It's not a matter of trying to silence your mind. It's a matter of the technique and meditation that you happen to be using that allows it to unfold once you get to that space. Because I personally, and I'm glad that you're a devotional guy through the heart, I personally have very visceral experiences. Now, I know we don't want to go into this full length now. Your podcast with Miguel Farias was so interesting to me. And I know there's two sides to the whole meditation story, which we can discuss in another podcast. But for me, it was good. It worked for me. I never had a dark side to it. It opened up my heart center. I found a space that separated me from my ego self because I was experiencing these visceral resonances through visual light and internal vibrational things that were moving through my body. So my attention was really focused there and then beyond. And it allowed me to, when I said later in life, separate and discover the witness that was inside of me, whether it's my soul or whatever. I mean, I have a whole story about it, which is my story, of course. Everybody's got their story. But I found that witness, and I was able to use that witness as a mentor at that point and lose that ego part of myself that was more destructive because it's always there anyway. I mean, everybody, to lose the ego is probably, the death part of you. So, anyway, please go on.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, really beautiful. It sounds, I mean, sounds like maybe you're right. You just needed some time to ripen into that. But I mean, there's a couple of things that are on my mind just based on what you were saying. One of them is what I talk about in the book is also about having a path that really aligns with your life. Because if you're somebody who wants to be or finds himself to be in a family, with kids and working in the world, and you join a community that's very focused on asceticism or monasticism, right? Or and then you wind up in this bind where you, like you were just articulating, oh, I can't spend enough time there. I'm not getting as far in my practice as I should be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas a different community that's oriented towards lay life, right, and that encourages you to practice in your home and to practice with your family, and how does your work become part of your practice, and so on and so forth, is just a better fit for somebody in that kind of in that phase of their life or in that place, right? So it's not only finding the community and the practice that is aligned with your own inclination, but also with your circumstances, right? So for me, I just discovered, oh, being a monk in a forest halfway around the world is not actually what I want out of my life, right? I want more. I'm more connected with my family. I come from a Latino family, so it's all about the family, and
Okay.
and I want more connection with people, and I'm more social than that, and I want my world to be bigger than just my little hut in the forest, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way that I happen to be aligned. Now, when I went to the monk and told them that I was leaving the temple, they thought I was, like, diluted and going back. They were so sad that I was that I was so stupid to leave, right? But it just didn't fit with my. Not only did it not fit with my kind of my inclination in terms of spiritual, abilities or whatever, but it just didn't fit with my life. And so there's all this cognitive dissonance that you can create for yourself with spirituality when you don't have these things aligned. So anyway, that was one thing I was thinking. And again, I don't know your story, but it sounds like maybe some of that might have been going on, possibly. Um, but the other thing I think is that I'm trying to do in the book is get beyond the specifics of the specific practices, because people will say, they'll be in a setting, in a community, they'll be practicing a certain kind of practice, and they'll think, oh, I'm having these kinds of experiences, these kinds of like connections or openings or blissful experiences or loving experiences or whatever, these positive effects of spirituality. And it must be because I'm spending 45 minutes exactly facing east, with this picture in front of me and that bell, happening. And therefore I need to like exactly replicate this thing. And because it's all of those specifics that are, making the practice happen. And I'm trying to say in the book, well, look, there is such a thing as discovering your heart, right? And all of these different traditions have different ways of doing that. They have different practices, different iconography, different figures, right? You find Guanyin in Chinese Buddhism, you find, Amitabha Buddha in Japanese Buddhism, you find, I don't know, various gods and goddesses in Hindu traditions, and gurus, and other kinds of figures that people have devotion for. And you can open your heart really based on any one of those different practices, or, for that matter, practicing with the Virgin Mary or Jesus or other figures from non-Asian traditions that I don't know very much about, so I won't talk about. But you can open your heart with in a lot of different kinds of ways, following a lot of different kinds of practices. The point isn't the specifics of the practice and the exact, dogma that you discovered this in. The point is to open the heart, right?
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to do with the book, is just to kind of point people towards the kinds of phenomena they can experience through different kinds of practice. And let's not get hung up on the dogmas and the settings. Let's focus on the actual phenomena themselves. Let's focus on the capacities that people have to open up in these ways. And the last thing I'll say is just in response, because you said a whole lot of things in there. I just want to make sure I hit all the points that I was thinking of. The last thing that I want to say is this book does, you alluded to negative consequences or side effects of practice. And I do try to give what I think is a balanced view about these practices too, because for every mystical experience or wondrous, opening you can have, you can also have, you know, uh, negative experiences. You can wind up, in a cult, or you could wind up with an abusive guru, or you could wind up with a spiritual emergency, or you can wind up, in all kinds of different sorts of difficult situations on the basis of practicing spirituality as well. So I'm trying to give kind of a more balanced view of that. And I know you guys wanted to maybe have me back on at another time to talk about in particular, the side effects or negative
Yes, right,
spiritual emergencies that
right.
people. So that's my academic research, and you know, we can come back. We can do another session on that. But just to say, like, because that's my academic research and something that I've been focused on in the academic study, then when I wrote this book, I was like, I can't hide that. I can't ignore that. I can't paper that over and sort of pretend that it's not there when it very much is. And so I wanted to talk about that as well.
Just one more thing before Gary comes in. Um, in your podcast, the woman that Miguel was talking about, in particular at the beginning of the podcast, went away to a retreat. She had been doing yoga for an extended amount of time, and she was having wonderful experiences. She went away to a retreat and had, I guess, a horrible experience, maybe through a meditation there. And for a decade, I think it was, uh, really got very depressed. It had a very strong psychological effect on her. And then she met Miguel, and he was able to help her work through this whole thing. Now, when I left the center, I dove back into the outer life, we'll say, and I didn't have such a wonderful experience for 12 years. But at a certain point, and I kind of like lost my center, my standing as far as my spiritual life was concerned. But then my wife and I lost one of our children, who was 6 years old. And it was one of these tragedies that sent such a shock through us, such a shock wave through us, that it was so spiritual that we could almost feel something kind of like shake loose and open up. And then it brought the whole thing back. And from that moment on, we were having an entirely different experience spiritually. And that opened up this whole new avenue that has brought me to where I am today. Now, I can pretend that, yes, that was the thing that did it. But deep inside, I know. I mean, there was nothing ever I felt in my life like that,
Yeah.
like that amount of pain and sorrow. And uh, I decided that I was just going to surrender to it. Now, the other thing you said was when the monks said you were crazy for leaving. I'm just curious. An enlightened being would not resist you leaving the Zen, uh, the path, because he would understand that this is human life. I mean, this is what happens. So, when somebody says, "Oh no, you're wrong. You shouldn't leave," I'm not sure that person is entirely in that space of surrender and non-resistance. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, Stefan, I understand the the impact that the loss of your child had on you spiritually. I understand that. I haven't had that experience, but I am a father. I have a family. I have had experiences that have been heartbreaking, and there is something very transformative about really surrendering to um, a, a, a a very hard, very difficult, very sad situation, and just the suffering of being a human being and sort of surrendering to the suffering of being a human being, not trying to transcend it in the sort of
Mm.
escapist kind of bypassing kind of way, but actually just fully allowing it to eviscerate you and really, really feeling it. That is one of the ways to open your heart. It's not an easy way. It's not a pleasant way to do it, but it is one of the ways that your heart can burst open. Having that kind of experience, and so um, the your comments making me think of kind of the distinction between a difficult challenge on a spiritual path, there's many difficulties, many challenges that turn out in the end to be something that needs to be digested, embraced, integrated, right? It's something that needs to be sort of like succumbed to or surrendered to or allowed to be there or worked with, right? There's all kinds of different situations, and how to work with them skillfully may differ. But that's kind of one category of challenge or difficulties, the ones that need to be worked with or accepted. And then there's the ones that are crises that are avoidable, um, and that when they're hit, it's not about surrendering into them. It's about, you went too far, you went too fast, you did something, or the practice was not right for you, or something happened that you're now in a medical, whether it's physical or mental health related, but you're now in a medical crisis that needs some assistance, right? So there's a distinction to be made between those two things. Different traditions have different wisdom around this. And I'm an expert in Buddhism in my academic study, so I know more about what Buddhists say about this sort of thing. But every Buddhist tradition in the world, I can now say, because we'll talk about this next time, but I've collected a whole set of texts from around the world. Pretty much every Buddhist tradition in the world recognizes that there's a line, that the line is sometimes crossed, and that there are ways of preventing as well as treating those kinds of crises when they arise. So I think there's a difference, between those two that's important, because we don't want to suggest that spirituality is just super easy and everything's like up, up and away, and you're just like, bliss and light and love 100% of the time. I actually think that's a pretty good sign that you're not on an authentic spiritual path. If that's what you're experiencing, I think it's a pretty good sign that there's some kind of bypassing going on that should be looked at.
Listen, I'm telling you, amazing, amazing. Buy the book.
Um, okay, so one thing I should say, um, which is that so your listeners may run the gamut between people who are more sort of like starting out and more kind of like experienced, more seasoned in terms of these, types of spiritual experiences and so forth. So I do want to mention that the book that we're talking about, Lamp Unto Yourself, is the beginner's guide to Asian spiritual traditions. But I have a sequel that I'm working on. It's not published yet, but I took the 50 pages or so, the kind of the core of the book, and I put it up on a website, and the website is multidharma.net. And so on multidharma.net, you'll see the book we're talking about now, Lamp Unto Yourself. But then you'll also see another book called Threads of Awakening. And that book is, like I said, not finished, but you can read it, get a preview of it. And that book is the kind of like this model that I'm talking about right now, written for more advanced people who've had more spiritual experiences and who have kind of like maybe entered into an awakening process. And it's sort of talking about the same kind of integrated approach on the more sort of like farther end of the awakening process. So that might
So
be
hold it
something
there,
worth reading.
because the book we're talking about now, this is the beginning process. It's a beginner's guide to Asian spiritual practices. Pierce wrote it, A Lamp Unto Yourself. Now, by the book, but what you're saying now, you have a next level kind of thing on your website. We'll post a link. Stefan will post a link to your website. What's it? Multidharma,
Multidharma.net. Yeah.
and then
And
you
so
have the
it's,
advanced. You have the
yeah.
more advanced.
Yeah, if if people like what they read, I would say start with whatever level of spirituality you're at, whatever background you have and so forth. I would say start with Lamp Unto Yourself, because it gives the scaffolding and the kind of the basis, and then the Threads of Awakening is the sequel. What comes next.
So
So
I'm thinking about three podcasts now.
okay.
Okay, next podcast we'll do the downside of non-duality, the downside of meditation. But I personally am very interested in doing a third podcast. I hope Stefan wants to join me. Uh, I want to do the threads of awakening because the more listen, I can't get enough of this non-dual stuff. Stefan has too much already, but I can't get enough of the non-dual stuff. So let's do three podcasts.
I mean, if we're gonna do three podcasts, then yeah, we can be relaxed about what we're talking about now because you're trying to fit everything into this one, and we can just sort of like let things go for next time. So yeah,
Why don't we cap
I'm
it here?
happy.
Let's do that. Let's stop
Mhm.
here, and then next episode we'll pick up from
Yeah.
the momentum we have right now, talking about the non-dual perception and the various nuances within that, and then go to the new book in progress, The Threads of Non-Duality, which is on your website. I think it's a perfect segue.
So thank you, Pierce.
Yeah. Thank you. This
You've
has been great. It's been fun.
yeah, you've made my Tuesday really, yeah,
Well,
very
and we
cool.
didn't even talk about the devotional thread or the heart opening thread yet. So next time I'll we'll be sure
Excellent.
to talk about that in more
Good.
detail.